Welcome to a Good Friday episode of Foresight TV. I'm just back from vacation, so I've been off air for like 10 days, which has been, I can't remember the last time I've done that. And as I was in Hawaii, I spent a lot of time thinking about you guys, the audience. The work we're doing in senior living is God's work. We know that not everybody watches, not everybody pays attention, but we know that the audience that we have is the best audience, the best operators, the people who are most concerned. We love you for your passion. Today's a very unique episode. I'm actually going to be providing commentary. Leigh Ann, who really manages all of our content and is the most organized person, is on with her father and her sister, who are experts in disaster management. And Leigh Ann is an expert in experiencing a disaster. And we're going to talk a little bit about disaster preparedness. Of course, it's something that senior living spends a lot of time talking about and thinking about. But honestly, nobody ever thinks that it's really going to happen to them, even when they're prepared. And that's why this episode is so important. But before we get into it, we're going to start with this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. Leigh Ann, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I'm going to be part of your panel.
Oh, awesome. This is fun. All right, tables are turned. Hi, everybody. This is a family reunion special on Foresight TV. I've got my dad here and my sister, and the reason they're here is that, as Steve said, they're disaster experts. And I've just been through a tornado. You may have seen it on TV. It made national news. It was in Amory, Mississippi, 2 weeks ago today. And what it prompted was, you imagine wherever you are in the country, you have potential disasters, whether they're man-made or natural disasters, and you can kind of imagine what they're like, but you don't know what they're like until you've been through it. So I've been through it. I can tell you a little bit about what they're like, what to prepare for. And then my sister is here. This is Beth Fernandes. She's a flight medic for 2 decades now. And has a degree in emergency management. She was a disaster aide in Katrina. And my dad, Dr. James Hubbard, he's the author of the Survival Doctor's Complete Handbook, What to Do When Help is Not on the Way. We used to publish the survival medicine blog together. So it happens to be a family of survivalist expert type of people. And I happen to go through this tornado. So I'm going to tell you real quick about what the tornado was like very quickly. And then we're going to get into some things that you may feel like you have a disaster preparedness, thing going on. You have some plans, but do you really? And are there some things maybe you haven't thought about, and some things we can clarify? On last 2 Fridays ago, we here in Mississippi and in North Mississippi, we're having a normal spring day, and we had the potential for severe weather, but that's normal for springtime around here. And that night, it turned out, well, we had a tornado. We didn't know that the tornado was going to touch down till it was right at knocking at our door. I ended up in the tub which is one of the places you can go to be as safe as you can, with a mattress over you. And I have 2 dogs with me, and you're just waiting and to see if your house is going to be ripped to shreds. Mine, fortunately, was not, but about 1/4 of the town was. And these are some slides. That's right across the street from my house. That was the first thing I saw when I stepped outside, was a tree in somebody's house. And then we'll go through some other slides, and you can just imagine the entire town, the town that you live in, looking like that, and what it feels like. And what happens is it becomes very surreal, and your brain kind of goes out the window a little bit. So preparedness becomes essential. So I'm going to welcome on my dad and my sister, bring them into the conversation. We're going to assume in this conversation that that your community has a disaster preparedness plan. If you don't, you need one, but we're going to assume you have that, and a generator that works, all those sort of things that you need to lay the groundwork with. And we're going to get into some other things you might want to think about. So, to Dr. Hubbard, first question to you. All right. So let's say they have the plan, and something that you have talked about often is the importance of not just having a plan, but of running through it regularly. And that can get kind of annoying. I mean, you think about fire drills. Oh, it's another fire drill, and you roll your eyes. Why is it important that people practice their plans?
Well, one of the reasons is because during a disaster, if you're involved in a disaster, your mind changes. Like you said, you have you go through a surreal moment. You don't really think clearly, and you may think you are, but if you're in the disaster, say you're hurt or somebody's hurt, or there's a lot of debris or problems around you, then you're not going to be thinking clearly. So it's good to have some things memorized, or so good, so well in your mind that they're almost like a reflex if this happens. And then you don't have to think so much. The only way you're going to do that is to study those things, and to also, one of the great ways to prepare is to go through the process of some sort of prepared rehearsal several times over a period of time, and have it, and let everybody participate, and try to make sure everybody is on track and not distracted, and have that plan in place, those first two things. The other thing about it is that even if you had, despite what your mind is thinking at that time, things go wrong, things are different. There's always, the disasters are always a little different. The situation is always a little different. You need to go through at least through the routine that you would have. And if there's any particular type of disaster you're more prone to in your area, then think of that. There are some things during disasters that are just common, everybody should know, and then there are some specific for specific disasters, such as where the tornadoes get in a safe place. You need to make sure that you are able to do that, and at an appropriate time, and see how long it's going to take. It's probably going to take you a lot of things. If you're having other people involved, it's probably going to take you longer than what you think.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for example, and you've talked about before about how doctors will practice things over and over and over again. So it is a reflex and you don't have to think about it. And I know when it happened to me, I walked outside. Now I know things to do. And I walked outside, and my brain was not on right because it's in fight or flight mode. And I ended up standing in a puddle next to what could have been a downed power line because the pole was hanging over. You know, you can get electrocuted like that. So, your brain just isn't working. So things to think through that I can think of as you're watching. Think about in your town. What if your grocery stores are down and you can't get out of town to get groceries? Do you have food for yourself, for your residents? What if your roads are blocked? And because that's what happened here, I couldn't get out of town for a minute because the trees were all in the road. So what if nobody can enter or leave your community? What if emergency services can't get to you because the roads are blocked for a time? Do you have plans for that? What if your pharmacies are down? That happened. My pharmacy went down. They didn't have Wi-Fi. So do you have extra medicines? Dr. Hubbard, here's a question. So you try to keep your medicines refilled, but can you go and request from your doctor an extra month's worth of meds, let's say, to keep on hand?
That would depend on the doctor, but a lot of doctors, nurse practitioners, physician assistants would do that. Now, if it's some sort of scheduled medication, they may be reticent to do that. But on the other, explain to them and ask them, can they give a little bit extra? Now, if you have that, it may cost, if your insurance pays, they may not pay for it. You may have to pay out of pocket. But it's always good to have, a week or two or even a month's supply of things, medications, essentials available. Any equipment that you use, you need to make sure it's up to date. You need to make sure your batteries are not down and rusted, because that happens. You wait and then all of a sudden, out of the blue, you have a disaster, and you look and, oh, where are my batteries? Oh, I found them. Now they're no good anymore.
Yeah.
Those are the only ones I have. That's why it's good to have an update and look at everything on a periodic basis.
Yeah, and rotate them as you go.
And I would just add to that, there's been a story recently about, I think, American Airlines, where they've had AEDs on the airplanes. And these are people who should have programming and schedule right. And they've gone to use the AEDs and the batteries haven't been recharged. So what a terrible, potentially life-threatening thing. So.
Yeah. And there's no need to waste the medication, the batteries and things. Like Leigh Ann said, rotate it. When you look, use the ones that you have and replace them with a newer type of whatever equipment or medication that you have. So everything is always not old or expired.
Beth, I want to bring you into the conversation because we're going to move now into what immediately after the disaster happens. So
let me point something out real quick.
You
are the daughter of an incredibly educated and experienced physician, the sister of an EMS worker, only thing I've ever done my entire career. And you went outside and stood on a puddle just waiting to be electrocuted. So that shows you the reason why you need to practice and rehearse and do things in real time, actually put your hands on it, actually check things before the emergency goes, which includes post-emergency, the cleanup and the aftermath. But I just wanted to point that out to people that you knew better in so many different ways, but you were just in shock and that happens. But that's why we practice too.
And that can happen to anyone. That can happen to me or anyone in a disaster. So the very first, some things are going to happen right away, just quickly. You have to prepare for them. You have to do them. But most of the things you're going to have at least a few seconds. And always remember to keep yourself safe first. That's the key. The very first thing you should do is keep yourself safe, and then look for others or look for damage or whatever. Because if you don't keep yourself safe, there's somebody, you're going to be an extra burden and you're not going to be help to anyone. In fact, you're going to be needing the help and when you should be actually providing help.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because we watch TV and we watch people running into the emergency and saving lives. And, that's a good way to get our
Nobody runs. Nobody runs.
Nobody runs. Yeah, well, that's what, okay. So yeah. Hey, Elsie. So when you are, Beth, speaking as an emergency responder, let's say you come in after the disaster, I'm thinking about Katrina and disasters like that. How do pros approach it that we might learn from? And what is it like to walk into a disaster where everybody's I imagine you said before, I think everybody's face is kind of glazed over. It's just like disbelief.
Yeah, different people go through the phases of grief in different ways and in different orders. So you can't ever really be ready for whichever phase. You just have to be there to support the person. But I think that my dad did a really good job of reminding everybody that you have to practice, and that's what we do. We practice, we have algorithms, we have charts, we memorize them, BSI, scene safe, MOI, number of patients. I remember that from my very first EMT class, and it's rote memory. But when your mind is no longer with you because it's in shock and your brain is in the fight or flight, like you said, you're going to revert to your training or what you know. And if your training is good and well established, then you're just going to start working like a robot, going through checklists. And that's what you really need to do in an emergency. Just go through your checklists, make sure you're going down the line, and remember that in an emergency, you're going to revert to what you're used to, what you know. The military does this too. They wrote practice everything until it's second nature. And that's where you want to be for emergency status. So for senior living people, for residents, that means actually practicing an emergency response or an evacuation or whatever your plan is, actually doing it, as opposed to looking at it on paper, because on paper it looks really good. But I promise you, if you practice it, you're going to find something. So for example, we had a senior living facility that did evacuations, and they did practices, but they stopped before they took the patients out of the building. So something actually really happened, and it turns out that the beds couldn't fit through the exterior doors. So we had to take apart the beds so that they would fit. But that was precious time, and thankfully we had it. But you also have to remember things like that. We are there taking apart beds instead of going down the street to an emergency where somebody's dying. You know what I mean? So not only is it your responsibility to your residents, it's your responsibility to the community. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, great.
Off-road a little bit.
No, that's great. One thing that I noticed is I helped out after the tornado at the animal shelter. And it's interesting when you're in a position where you are trying to care for yourself, your family, in this case, it was animals that we were caring, but other people, other beings. So in senior living, you'd be caring for your residents, but then also, so you're trying to do your own recovery, but also you're serving the community at the same time. And you have people coming to you to ask you for your help. And in the case of senior living, Steve, I'm going to imagine there's going to be family coming out like crazy, wanting to know what the heck's going on. And that, Steve, is where I would imagine you would really want to have your communication system down pat, even though immediately after, you may not have Wi-Fi, cell service, electricity, but maybe you should prep your families beforehand, let them know your emergency plans, and then let them know where to look for communications once you can get those out. Steve?
Yeah, and I think that what the lesson really is that you've got to have multiple ways of communication. I don't know whether you'd go as far as having an executive director or maybe 2 or 3 leaders in the building where you'd actually have a family contact in your personal cell phones where you could contact them in an emergency. The one thing I would say is that I think that communication is so important to the families. I think there's a tendency on the part of professionals of, I'm super busy, I don't have time to communicate. But when you don't communicate to families, to people who care, people who have an interest in it, you actually make things worse, right? Because if you're not going to communicate, they're going to be coming at you. They're going to be mad. They're going to be picking at you. And so taking the time, and I think, Beth, when you talked about going through checklists, I really like that. I used to ski patrol, and we do all these scenarios and we practice. But I think that being able to really think through these scenarios is just so critical. And the story about the beds is horrifying. But I think, and the other question I sort of have is, to me, if you're working in senior living, there are perhaps 2 parts to this. The first part is the part that people plan about. So every community, the law, the regulations require that you have disaster planning, right? And they do some sort of rehearsing. I think mostly people hate it and they don't do very much because residents don't like it. But I think the other part of it, and maybe would be worth talking about, is as a individual, if I haven't taken care of myself and made my own prep, I can't be effective in taking care of my residents and my staff.
And PTSD prevention is a thing, and that this is how we prevent anxiety, PTSD issues afterwards. We've talked about the mental health that's so important. But if you rehearse to the point where it's rote memory, you know what to do, you're calm, then you're doing everything you can to reduce the amount of issues post-emergency.
Yeah.
And I'm up on the rote and everything. I think like the mnemonics, like an ABCs for airway breathing and cardiovascular compression, those are important to know. I think Beth, they may be different now, maybe CAB, compression version.
Yeah, it depends on who you ask. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, to know that, just know those three. Always know that you put direct pressure on a bleed. And yeah, I've had several in my office come in and they're bleeding and they're panicked and they don't. And all they had to do to stop the bleeding was put pressure on the wound. Now, if you have a big fracture or something, or there's not, sometimes there's not that way, but in these particular cases, there was. So have your mnemonics. You can look some of those up. There are several, just a few to keep on hand. And I still remember some from medical school, which was over 40 years ago now. I still remember those things, and even though I don't use them a lot anymore, so they're good to know, and then just know the basics.
Yeah,
that's a good point. EMS is not always there responding. Sometimes we're stuck too, and sometimes your staff workers are stuck. During COVID, we had a snowstorm and the nurses were actually physically stuck in the hospital and no nurses could come in. So you have to think about stuff like that too. And somebody commented, I don't know who it was, but it reminded me that you can, as a facility, you can get with your local EMS and you can involve them in your disaster drill. So that way they know where everything is. They're comfortable with the layout. They know your residents and you know what they're there to do if they can get to you, if that makes sense. Involve them. They like it. It's what we do.
The other reason for practice is you have a changeover of staff and some of the people that are new may have not have gone over.
Yeah,
true.
There's a whole lot of new nurses after COVID now, and they haven't been through this.
Yeah. And Steve, go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things I think that sometimes it's really important to sort of step back, and that this is kind of where checklists are about the basics. I remember back when I was doing my ski patrol training, which is sort of an EMS level of training. And I remember we had this manual that was this thick on outdoor emergency medicine. And I was reading all this stuff and it was so confusing. And an emergency medicine doc came and talked to us and he says, this is a problem that it gets complex and this knowledge is all really important. But he said, the first thing you just think about it, you need to simplify it. Are they breathing? If they're breathing, yes, then that's good. And you move on. If they're not breathing, get them breathing. If they're bleeding, stop the bleeding, then figure out what hurts and work on what hurts. And if you do those three things, you're most of the way there. And I think that that's a good rule of thumb as a place to start. Although I know that right now, is it airway or compressions is sort of a new thing, right? Since I did my training. So.
Yeah, this is.
And that's why you get with your local EMS. They'll be able to tell you that what they're going to do. They love this stuff. Just invite them. I promise you.
Invite your EMS, get there. And every region has different emergency or disasters or whatever that sometimes vary with the region, and some are pretty common. Power outage is going to be common. Tornadoes, more regional, although I think I read that some happened in California this just lately. And so you need to know some of those other things, but the things that are more that you like, I don't know that much about California, but earthquakes, you need to know what to do, what you can do, for safety of that. And then you also need to know about the other disasters, at least in a general mechanism. And as far as medical, then the basic, most of the things are pretty basic. The bleeding, the airways, the compressions, that sort of thing, and several other things like that are pretty basic and pretty common.
I have one more question, and then see if Steve has anything, or if y'all have anything we've missed. But before I get to that, Steve, you had made the point earlier of it's important to personally prep. And I think that's a great point. And I'm going to write an article about that. So if you don't subscribe to Foresight, keep an eye, go subscribe, and keep an eye out for that article. Because there are things that definitely need to do that you may not have thought of. But the last question I have for Beth and Dr. Hubbard is, Dr. Hubbard, you often say that you see the most injuries, not not from the disaster itself, but from the aftermath. Can both of you talk about that and some things, like one or two things that common injuries or ailments that you see that people should watch out for after the disaster?
Well, of course, it partly depends upon the disaster, but I don't think people, you have you get into your brain situation and your thinking doesn't clear just immediately after the disaster. You're what happened, you can't believe what's happened outside or inside or whatever. The things that I've seen in the past, I've always thought that, okay, there's a tornado in the area, or there's going to be a big wind and trees. I'm going to get ready in my office or in the emergency room to see a lot of cuts. People don't know how to use chainsaws. They start using them, or they do know how to use them. They just get too excited and forget the safety mechanism. So it's, again, make yourself safe first. Safety is for you. Limbs or debris falling and injuring people for bruises or cuts or broken bones, head traumas, and obviously the electric. Always remember that, don't go into a house that's full of water and turn on the electricity right away. That's a way to get electrocuted. Or don't go, if you smell gas, get out of the house, and that's period. That's the end of that until somebody with an expert can come and check on your gas or shut it off or something like that. So that's what I see.
Beth?
That's a hard question to answer because every emergency brings different injuries. But I would say in a normal everyday emergency, the ones that I respond to on a daily basis, we can usually get to you. But during an emergency, your local EMS and fire department have also been through the same disaster. And they might not have the fire engines to come and put out your house fire, or they might not have the ambulances able to get to you, or the roads might just be logistically impossible to get through and we're hiking it in. So the reliance on the 911 system is a little, I think that people rely on it more than they realize it until you call 911 and 911 says, we don't know when we're going to be able to get to you. So you need to shelter in place. And you need to be able to do that and survive preferably comfortably, because we can't get to you sometimes.
It was like Leigh Ann in her situation. Power went off.
Yeah.
She had no communication whatsoever.
Yeah.
Her cell phone was not working.
Right.
And that's
the thing. The cell phone towers get over.
Battery radio, but that'll help a little, but on information.
Yeah, the cell phone towers get overrun, and then you can't get out sometimes. If people are interested, though, I carry an inReach, which is a satellite. I don't get any money from them. I'm not selling anything, but inReach satellite texting has been very reliable, and people in Alaska use it quite often in situations where the cell phone towers get overrun with communications.
Great. I have so many more questions, but we're up on time. Steve, you got anything up?
I think for me, the big thing is for senior living people is that this is just really important stuff to think about, that it's easy to think that, and I'm going to do a little self-confession here. I was in Hawaii for vacation, and flying back, we landed in LA before flying on to Sacramento, and we had a fairly tight connection, and they had a problem with the gate. And so we were right up front. I went up to the flight attendant and I said, we got a really tight connection. And she looked at me and she said, you'll have enough time. But she said, did you listen to any of my announcements that I made? And I hadn't. And I confess. And she sort of talked about all the things that I should have listened to, and I just didn't. And so it becomes really easy to tune out that stuff or think it's never going to happen. And I think the more time you spend thinking about it, preparing about it, and again, the things that you do. I actually have a final question for you, Leigh Ann. because I think you just have gone through this disaster where fortunately it didn't impact you personally, but what behaviors are you going to do differently now because of what you went through? What are the things you're doing differently?
Nobody has asked me that. Ooh, let me think. What I'm going to do is, first of all, I'm going to be, I'm very glad of certain things that I had been doing, and I will keep them up. And I'm going to put those in the article, but examples are keep my gas tank topped off, keep my cell phone, charged when I need to, keep water, not only water, but healthy foods, because I have found that a lot of shelf-stable foods that you might be tempted to keep for survival purposes are junk food. If you can go for the healthy food, you're going to want that healthy food to keep your body nourished during this stressful time, because it's stressed. Things I would do differently, I'm going to make a go bag. I know I should have a go bag. I don't. And a go bag is something that where you put in what you might need for just a few days, including meds. Hey, Zuzu. And then I have found that the go bag is not meds, water, food, clothes. It's not only so you can grab it and go fast. I always thought it was just so you can grab it and go fast. It's also because your brain is not working. And so you might not be able to think through all the things that you're going to need. So go ahead and have it done. And I'm just going to evaluate as I go forward and keep trying to get more and more prepared. But I feel I'm going to get a storm shelter. That's one thing I want to
do. So Beth, I'm glad you mentioned the InReach. I carry an InReach when I backpack.
They're great.
It is so inexpensive. I think I pay $20 a month or something like that. And you've got pre-programmed messages for when you're out hiking and doing routine stuff, and you can text message, and it's not for the safety. It's a terrific idea. But the other thing that we didn't really talk about that I think is actually really critical, and that's water. We just assume that we're going to go turn on the tap and we're going to get water that's drinkable. Leigh Ann, you actually have been you've been in a different situation there off and on since the hurricane, right?
Since the tornado. Yeah.
The tornado, I'm sorry.
We were fortunate that we had running water, but we were under a boil water notice. And if you only have an electric stove, you're out of luck. Beth, I'm glad you brought this up, because Beth gave me a tip directly after the tornado. She said, fill up your tub. Beth, why did you say that?
Because your tub is the largest container you have normally, and you want the most amount of water. So I've been in situations where not only would you be able to drink that water, and normally I would say do it before the emergency, but that was your hiding spot. So we filled it up after. But you can drink it, but also again, for mental health, for putting you in the right spot. For me personally, after a few days, I need a shower, whether that be like a wet bath cloth or a white, that you use for your hands usually, or, know yourself and know what you need when you have nothing. And water is important. And like Steve said, it's one of those things that we take for granted. But when you need it, you can't fake it. You can't make it out of nothing. You can't even dig in the ground and get the water that you need, because that's not normally drinkable. But that's why.
Well, I think water is important, and you can go to when I was there are other things, essentials, and you can go to like a government emergency site like FEMA or something, and they'll have some good tips on that for at least the minimum of stuff you need. And also about the go bag, yes, definitely, but also keep the go bag in a place where you will remember where it is. It's easily accessible, but also is out of the disaster area if possible. I mean, say a safe room. Keep it in a safe room if you're in tornadoes. If you have a tendency to be flooding, keep it on a top shelf or on the at least floor level and not in the basement, that sort of thing, and be sure to know where it is.
Or with you. We always say if it's not on you, then you won't have it. And that's why we say it, because you got to get it. And then think about the things that you would run into your house if your house was on fire and get because you want it so bad, like little pictures, mementos, little things like that. Those are important to put in your go bag too, because when you leave, you don't know what you're coming back to.
I would say one more thing about that. When thinking about senior living professionals, when you go to work, take some meds with you if you can. That was one thing that happened is that people's meds get blown away and then you're without your meds for days. Or if you can't get home, again, you're without your meds for days. So I keep mine in my purse at least a few days worth.
Absolutely. Keep them in your car, keep them at work, something, because disasters don't only happen when you're at work or even for the people in the homes and the elderly living homes. If they're going out somewhere, keep something with you of the essentials.
Cool. Well, thank you very much. We are out of time. I appreciate your time, appreciate your passion for this. We need people like you, Dr. Hubbard, and you, Beth, who really, really care about this to teach us how to do this better. Leigh Ann, I'm so glad you're safe and that, I'm glad it's your neighbors and not you. Not that I wish it on your neighbor, but anyway, I'm just glad that you were safe on this. And this is how we learn together, by experiencing these things and figuring out how to do it better. So, do those practices. When you do those practices, figure out what went wrong, use those as learning lessons, not to beat people up, because that's what practices are for. Have a good Easter weekend, and we will be back with you next week.